So hi Brett, welcome. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Can you tell me what the topic of your last discussion was?
Well, we sort of took our topic from FDR. We have nothing to fear but fear itself. So we were kind of talking about fear and whether that is really true. The only thing you have to fear is fear itself.
Now, are there different kinds of fear?
There are many different kinds of fear, but we kind of corralled it down to two in our discussion. There's a group fear where a whole group of people is experiencing fear simultaneously, and there's individual fear. And then sort of within there, there's an immediate threat versus a longer term threat.
When you talked about group fear, that would seem to me to be about a threat that is perceived by everyone that is probably real. Is that right?
Not necessarily. Like, for example, in FDR's case, he was trying to discourage people from running to the bank and having a run on the banks accordingly, and hoarding food. Because people had a perceived fear that maybe the economic system would fall apart and that their access to food would be restricted. If everybody just acted calmly, none of that would be true. If everyone got into a frenzy and was fearful, yeah, indeed, it could happen.
And then it would just kind of feed on itself, wouldn't it?
That's right, snowballs. So he was trying to get everybody to take a step back and just look at how we can help one another and work as a group instead of focus on the individual risk. Let's work as a group to mitigate the risk for everyone.
Let's talk about the kind of fear that is apparent to an individual but not to anyone else, like personal fear. Did that come up?
Yes, personal fear came up. In fact, within the context of a specific book one of the members had read, talking about how women needed to pay attention to the eerie or the weird feelings they get if they're in the presence of someone they feel threatened by, and how they needed to react to that it was not a good idea to push that fear down, but it was important to act on it immediately. And so it gave us two different ways to deal with fear. One was to kind of push it down, link arms, and try and figure out a way to make everything work. And the other was to act immediately, invoke your fight or flight mechanism and try and remove yourself from the situation.
What other kinds of fear did you all discuss?
It wasn't so much that we talked about other fears in particular. We did talk about why is it that all of us seem to have a certain degree of irrational fear? Was this something that is sort of a Darwinian selection? And there was some argument that, hey, Darwinian selection is mostly focused around DNA, and unless you're going to associate this fear with some chromosomal association, it's not really fair to call it Darwinian. But in the broad sense of adaptability, is there something that is in this fear, this irrational fear, that helps us adapt and survive better? And one of the interesting things that came up as part of the discussion was, what's an irrational fear? It may be irrational when we see somebody else experience the fear, but to them it's genuine, it's real fear, and it doesn't seem irrational at all.
Where else did the conversation go that night?
There was a discussion of maybe you have a fear of something that really isn't a threat. So for example, if the Constitution, the original document, were somehow threatened, that might create a fear in you for the document, which is maybe an irrational fear, but one that all of us could understand having, even if we didn't have it ourselves. And how you would react in that circumstance, you might choose to react quickly. You know, somebody was about to drop a grenade next to the document, you might try to throw the grenade away or something like that. Or someone was accidentally going to brush by the document, which of course is not just out in the open where that could happen, but somebody were just going to brush by and you might pull them to the side so it didn't happen. So there are other times where you might have a fear that is maybe not irrational, but isn't a threat, and you'd act on that as well. And in general, we concluded those were probably pretty immediate, that fear was extremely short-lived, and you know, you don't have a long-term fear of the document being destroyed, even though that's the most likely circumstance, is that sometime in the future it's destroyed. And we did bring up, you know, there's flooding in the archives, you know, even this past week.
Do you want to touch? Should we touch on which fears you should, or the skill it might take to discern the fears you really should act on?
Yeah, it seems like it's very difficult to determine when you should act and when you shouldn't. That all of us benefit from guidance in those kinds of circumstances. A fear is so overwhelming. We talked about the fight or flight or freeze response, and how the adrenaline rush is present in all of those. And so it is kind of interesting to see. We're not possums. We don't have one response.
Right.
We have many.
I don't know if you guys got into this. There are supposedly two things that really shape a lot of human behavior. Fear is one of them, and the other one, I don't know, might be like staying away from the unpleasant. But did you possibly talk about the role of fear and anxiety in just day-to-day life?
We did a little bit. And this came up mostly during the discussion of, is fear a survival mechanism? For example, if your family really felt it was a great idea to run under ladders, and ladders had a habit of falling, there was a decent chance that your family would not survive, right? That the selective pressures on your family would be such that you wouldn't survive with that mentality. And we did talk briefly about how people tried to mitigate their fears. Like I had a friend who, if he were to, by happenstance, walk under a ladder, would immediately go to the nearest field and search for a four-leaf clover to compensate, right? Or have a black cat cross his path, or that sort of thing. So we did talk about fear in the sense of superstition, that maybe there was a whole set of things that went together that seemed like fear, but really were just superstition.
Mm-hmm. When people ski, there's some people who are fearless, and they'll go down the double black diamonds, and they seem to. I, on the other hand, will only go to the intermediate. If I just look down a double black diamond,
you and I should ski together.
Yes. So I wonder if there's a biological basis to this fear threshold, or a genetic basis. I don't know. I don't know if you guys got into that.
We didn't do this extensively, but we did talk about some people who seem to be adrenaline junkies. And we did talk about skiing, like jumping off a helicopter into powder on the top of a mountain and just going. Mm-hmm. And, who knows what you're going to run into. It's not like you can map out your route beforehand, and you might cause an avalanche, or any number of things could happen. Mm-hmm. So we also talked about, parachute jumping and other things like going to a horror movie. And the thought was, well, maybe some of this is knowing that you're in a safe environment, safe to you, mm-hmm. and yet still experiencing the adrenaline that goes with fear. So in a movie theater, it's a pretty safe environment. Nothing's going to happen to you. If you have confidence in your parachute, nothing's going to happen to you. If you are confident in your skills, misplaced or not, nothing's going to happen to you. So you feel comfortable and secure in your environment, but yet there's still the fear that goes with knowing that something bad could happen.
Mm-hmm. So how are things going with attendance at the Thoughtful Discussion group?
Well, things tend to be fairly static, and over the summer people go away on trips and that sort of thing. But we have had new members come, and I think it's partly been the exposure that we've gotten here at Greenbelt Access Television that's encouraged them to come forward. I hear from people just walking down the street, oh, so now you're a big celebrity on television.
Nice, nice.
And so it's nice to have our Greenbelters paying attention to Greenbelt Access Television, as well as encouraging those of us who come on.
Right, and more attendance at MakerSpace. I like that.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Well, thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to hearing how the next Thoughtful Discussion goes.
Sounds great. Thoughtful Discussions from 7 to 9 on Tuesdays in the Roosevelt Center under the umbrella.